Now, musical scales versus the fossil record. Basically, what I'm going to propose as biology, as a biological theory based on genesis, is that what we see in the fossil record is a musical scale of the creation of the biology on the planet Earth. Punctuated equilibrium is the description of evolution as it appears to move forward in jumps and skips. And this is what they're trying to propose today. This is what Dawkins was saying in his study. It goes and skips and jumps until you need something until you need to explain something as complicated as the eye, the brain. Then it goes in very gradual pieces like that. But anyways, it kind of goes back to what we were saying about the sun. You get this low density space in here, and you got a high density. There's a high density point of mutation in natural selection. These are low density points of mutation in natural selection. Where it goes very gradual, then all of a sudden it jumps, goes very gradual for a while, and all of a sudden it jumps. And this is their idea. Okay. Instead of just saying simply that you were created to be like this, just like we showed with the inverse square law. Okay, you have a species and the subspecies, and they're all related as if by the inverse square law through Mendelian genetics, and you can combine any kind of genes you want together to get specifically what you want. This is what all genetic research shows. You can manipulate the genes, but you're going to get a predictable outcome. If it was a goal like this, there would be no predictable outcomes. You can't make a prediction based on something that's random. You can't predict what's going to happen if everything just come together randomly. You would not ever know. But based on Mendelian genetics, we can predict exactly what will be created if we mix specific genes. This is what we're learning now today through genetic research, ever since Francis Collins took the human genome and other genes. All right, punctuated equilibrium is the theory that everything moves forward and skips and jumps. Okay. Musical scales. Now, each note on the scale represents a prime harmonic. Okay, so, now, you got a musical scale. You can see those. Let's see, these are white keys, black keys, white keys, black key, white key, black key, white key, white key, white key, white, black key. Anyway, you can see it. But it moves forward and skips and jumps also. These aren't continually gradual scales. You go from C4 here to C5. It's one octave on the piano scale. It's one octave that you can hear. Okay. Now, it moves forward, it skips and jumps from C4 to C5. The C4 octave from middle C to high C on the piano contains 12 intervals that we can hear, that we do hear. The just noticeable difference, quote unquote, between any two tones for the human ear is 1 hertz. This is what I was explaining earlier. Now, between C4 and C5 on the piano, that scale actually has over 200 different prime harmonics. So what I'm trying to say about prime harmonic is this. Harmonics. This goes back to acoustic theory. This is the prime harmonic. This wave moves up and down. It's called a standing wave, but it moves up and down just like that. Alright? And it only oscillates at this frequency. Okay? Now, also, what you don't hear contained within this prime harmonic is you hear subharmonics. Alright? In every prime harmonic, there's an infinity of subharmonics. The second harmonic goes like this. Second harmonic. Third harmonic. So forth and so on. Does everybody get the picture here? Okay. But you don't hear all these subharmonics. All you hear is the prime harmonic. But it's composed of an infinity of subharmonics. Okay, now over time, these subharmonics become attenuated. So the strength of the subharmonics within the prime harmonic become very small, indistinguishable, you can't hear it, and they become more relevant as you go up. Does that make sense? Okay. We'll get more back to that in a second. Now, now there's 12 tones in a C4 to C5 scale. There's actually 200 different notes between C4 and C5 that you can hear, but there's not 200 notes on the scale, on the piano scale. The reason the piano scale was created this way was It's because these are the most pleasing notes to your ear. Now, if you put all 200 notes on a C4 C, not only would it be impractical to try to play a piano anymore, because it would be like from that end of the stage to that end of the stage, but it's impractical to your ear too, because all you would hear is dissonance. You would never hear a harmonic scale. So it would be just noise to you if you had all 200 notes. But literally, what I'm telling you is that each of these are all prime harmonics. And within each of these prime harmonics, there's an infinity of other tones. Also, there's an infinity of tones between C4 and C5. But you can only hear 200 of those. Does that make sense? This is very important to understand this gradualization proposed by Darwin, and to understand distinct species proposed as reproducing after their own kind in Genesis. Okay? We'll get some more of that in a second. So, the reason that this possible infinite scale is divided into 12 tones is because that is the most pleasing arrangement to the ear. Instead of being absolute noise, it is very discrete based on the laws of mathematics and feng shui of the ear, like we said earlier about God designing the universe. Anything between these notes will be displeasing to your ear. The creation of such a scale obviously required an intelligent mind. This scale wasn't even created, well, the piano scale wasn't created until Bach, Beethoven, and all those guys back in the 1700s. So, now, the prime harmonic, as we said earlier, equals the so the prime harmonic of each of these tones is a kind. And within that kind, you have an infinity of possible subspecies. Okay? But once you get so far away from the prime harmonic, it becomes indistinguishable to you anymore. And it's irrelevant, as a matter of fact, to the piano scale, or to what you would call pleasing to the ear, or musical to the ear. So, each harmonic equals a kind, and each kind equals species. This is all starting to connect and make sense. Now, evolutionists say that out of an infinite amount of possibilities, we can get some right or good notes or gene manipulations in order to create species to form melodic sequences, which are the species. The problem with that idea is that the few instances of harmony that you would get in an infinite scale would be indistinguishable to the sea of dissonance and noise that it would be lost to, which is why you don't have a 200-note piano scale. With more than 12, but the truth is that we can create scales of more than 12 notes. There are scales in existence that have more than 12 notes between C4 and C5. Some scales contain up to 53 notes between C4 and C5, not 12. And as we said, we could create an infinity of half steps between C4 and C5. But the problem with that is the more notes in the scale, the more dissonant the scale becomes. In biology, this would lead to infinitely high mutation rates and a gradual Darwinian fossil record if you had an infinite amount of notes. But this is not what is observed in the fossil record. We don't see an infinite amount of gradual change over time, whether it's billions of years, whether it's millions of years, whether it's thousands of years. Okay? In the past, Darwinists assured us that the gaps in the fossil record would be filled in. 100 years later, when I made those quotes from 1974, 100 years later, this was absolutely false. Even though they had millions and millions of dug-up fossils, this was absolutely false. Today, there's still nothing to fill in the gaps. Now, they have, if you want to say that C4 is a single-celled microorganism, and you want to say C5 is a human, they do have little notes like this. But let's remember, these are all huge gaps. These are massive gaps because in between each of these tones, you have an infinity of other tones. And so they only can move in these discrete relationships. So this means that somebody had to divide what would not be good for creation and decide what would be good for creation to create harmony in the species. Which is what we were trying to say about the universe. Okay? Now, but if an intelligent person ahead of time was able to, out of infinite possibilities, pick the 12 notes that were most harmonic, as we did when we invented the piano scales. Infinite possibilities, pick the 12 notes that were most harmonic and pleasing to the ear, then reproduce them over and over, allowing only the greatest amount of harmony with the least amount of dissonance, then the 12-note scale is what we would see. Now, if somebody had done this in biology ahead of time, what would we see? We would see the distinct kinds and species and everything, and we would see that when they reproduce, just like when Bach and Beethoven started creating music based on piano scales, we would see all these massively pleasing sounding orchestrations. And this is exactly what we see in the ecology of the Earth today, the terrestrial systems of the Earth today. We see this huge, massive cohesion of prime harmonics coming together to form an amazing orchestration based on sound and acoustic principles, coming down to the inverse square law. Now, the skips and jumps then would automatically select out the highest degree of harmful dissonance. So once you start combining all these notes together, it is automatically, the dissonance is automatically selected out based on the mathematical laws of the scales. And this is what we see in the fossil record. I'm going to get to that in a second. Harmful dissonance, based on the preset scale developed from the intelligent mind. The 12-tone scale is the most pure scale. This would allow for not only variation within the scale, but would also allow for the greatest reproducibility of the kind, or composition's music, and create the skips and jumps, which is what we observe in nature and universe. Of course, we see 1, 3, 5, a major chord, and of course you can see minor chords, you can see major scales and minor scales. This offers us a way to understand all the biological diversity on the Earth based on musical composition. But right now, this is just pure speculation. I'm going to get to the science and back this up in just a second. So, why are there gaps in the fossil record? If the fossils can be related to musical scales, then a better description of the fossil record data